Asterisk, the storm had been chasing Marcus Kane across 3 states, its gray fury matching the tempest in his chest. Rain hammered against the windshield of his stolen Honda as he pulled into the gravel lot of the Moonlight Motel, forgotten relics squatting beside Highway 87, like a broken promise. Neon buzzed and flickered against the darkness, casting sickly pink light across puddles that reflected nothing but his own fractured soul. 3 days since he'd walked away from everything. 3 days since he'd discovered the truth about what his father's pharmaceutical empire had been built on, about the cancer patients who died because of falsified trial data, about the blood money that had paid for his Harvard education. The USB drive in his jacket pocket contained enough evidence to destroy Kane Industries and everyone in it, including himself. The motel clerk barely looked up from his crossword puzzle as Marcus slid $40 across the cracked Formica. "Counter room 12, the man mumbled, dangling a tarnished key. Marcus grabbed it without meeting his eyes, too afraid of what the old man might see there. Guilt had a way of carving itself into a person's face. The hallway reeked of cigarettes and broken dreams. Marcus found what he thought was room 12, though the numbers hung at odd angles, and the paint had peeled away in places. The key turned with surprising ease, and he pushed inside, desperate for solitude and the bottle of whiskey he'd bought at the last gas station. The room was dark except for the amber glow of a single bedside lamp. Marcus stepped inside already, reaching for his jacket when he heard it. Soft breathing, the rustle of sheets. Someone was in the bed. His heart slammed against his ribs as a figure sat up, silhouetted against the dim light. Long hair cascaded over bare shoulders, and even in the shadows he could see the elegant curve of a neck he'd once kissed in another lifetime. "Hello, Marcus." The voice hit him like a physical blow, smooth as aged whiskey, dangerous as a loaded gun. He knew that voice better than his own heartbeat, had heard it whisper promises and lies in equal measure 7 years ago. Sophia Chen rose from the bed wearing nothing but a silk camisole and the kind of smile that had once made him believe in redemption. She moved like water in moonlight, all dangerous grace and hidden currents. Her dark eyes held secrets that could drown a man if he wasn't careful. "You look surprised," she said, reaching for a wine glass on the nightstand. The liquid inside was dark as blood. "Didn't you get my message?" Marcus's hand instinctively went to the USB drive. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm in the wrong room, are you?" Sophia stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something expensive and predatory. "Room 13, Marcus. Same as always. You never could resist. Our little games." The number on the door outside had been wrong, or maybe he'd been wrong. In the darkness and rain, with his world crumbling around him, maybe he'd seen what he'd wanted to see. Maybe some part of him had been drawn here too. Her like a moth to a flame that had already burned him once. 7 years, he said, his voice rough with emotions he'd buried deep. 7 years of silence, and now you just happen to be here. Sophia's smile turned razor sharp. Coincidences are for people who don't plan ahead. I've been watching you, Marcus, waiting for you to finally grow a conscience. She gestured to his soaked clothes, his hollow eyes. Looks like it finally happened. Thunder crashed outside, shaking the thin walls. In the brief flash of lightning, Marcus saw something else in her expression. Something that looked almost like pain. "The Kane Industries scandal," she continued, setting down her wine glass with deliberate precision. "Falsified cancer trials. Hundreds of deaths. Your father's legacy crumbling. Such a tragedy." Her voice dripped with false sympathy. "But then again, you always knew the truth, didn't you?" The accusation hit him like a slap. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know until 3 days ago." "Liar." The word came out soft as silk and twice as cutting. "You've known for months, maybe. Years. You just chose to look the other way because it was easier than facing what your family really was." Marcus wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in his throat, because part of him had known. Part of him had seen the inconsistencies in the reports, heard the whispered conversations that stopped when he entered a room. He'd chosen ignorance because the truth was too heavy to carry. "What do you want, Sophia?" She moved to the window, pulling back the curtain to watch the storm. Lightning illuminated her profile, showing him the woman who'd once been his everything before she disappeared without explanation. leaving only a note that said she was sorry but some scenes couldn't be forgiven. "I want justice," she said simply. "For the people who died because of your family's greed. For the families who trusted Kane Industries to save their loved ones." She turned back to him, and in her eyes he saw something that made his blood run cold. "And I want you to help me destroy everything your father built." The room fell silent except for the rain against glass and the thundering of his heart. Marcus stared at the woman who'd once promised to love him forever, who'd vanished the night before they were supposed to run away together, who now stood before him like an avenging angel, demanding he betray his own blood. "And if I refuse—" Sophia's smile was beautiful and terrible. "Then tomorrow morning, every major news outlet will receive copies of your personal emails to board members. The ones where you discuss covering up the trial irregularities. The ones that prove you've been complicit for over a year." The USB drive in his pocket suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He'd come here to expose the truth, to finally do the right thing. Odd. But Sophia's version of the truth would destroy him along with everyone else. "You're bluffing. Am I?" She moved to her purse, extracting a phone with the casual confidence of someone holding all the cards. "One call, Marcus. That's all it takes to make you the face of this scandal, instead of just another victim of your father's lies." The storm outside seemed to echo the chaos in his chest. 7 years ago, he'd loved this woman enough to abandon everything for her. Now she was asking him to abandon everything again, but this time for a very different reason. Why? The question came out broken, desperate. "Why did you leave? Why come back now? What happened to us?" For just a moment, her mask slipped. He saw grief flicker across her features, raw and devastating, before she locked it away again. "Some questions don't get answers, Marcus. Some wounds don't get to heal." She picked up her wine glass, draining it in one smooth motion. "Oh, you have until sunrise to decide. Help me bring down Kane Industries the right way, or watch me do it the wrong way." Lightning flashed again, and in that brief moment of illumination, Marcus saw something that made his heart stop. There, on the nightstand beside her purse, was a small framed photograph. Even upside down and in the dim light, he recognized the faces. A young girl with Sophia's eyes and his own stubborn chin, maybe 5 or 6 years old, holding hands with a woman he'd never seen before. When the darkness returned, the photograph was gone, tucked away as if it had never existed. The image was burned into his retinas, raising questions that threatened to shatter what was left of his world. Sophia was already moving toward the bathroom, dismissing him with the casual cruelty of someone who held all the power. "Leave the key on the dresser when you go." And Marcus, not bothering to look back. "Try to get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a very long day." The bathroom door closed with a soft click, leaving Marcus alone with his racing thoughts and the terrible certainty that nothing would ever be the same. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, room 13, the real tempest was just beginning. Marcus sat in his car until dawn, engine running, heat blasting against the October chill, watching room 13 like a man staring at his own grave. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and gleaming with deception.
Every
few minutes he'd reach for the door handle, then stop, paralyzed by the weight of 7 years' worth of questions and the terrible certainty that some answers were worse than ignorance. The photograph haunted him. A child with his chin and Sophia's defiant eyes. The math was simple, brutal in its clarity. 7 years since she'd vanished. A girl who looked maybe 6, the timing aligned like pieces of a puzzle he'd never wanted to solve. When Sophia finally emerged from the motel room, she looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine instead of a roadside nightmare. Her black hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, her dark suit expensive and unforgiving. She carried herself like a woman who owned the world and was prepared to burn it down if necessary. Marcus got out of the car, his legs unsteady. "We need to talk." We talked. Shh. She unlocked a sleek Mercedes that had no business being in this parking lot. "You have my terms?" The photograph. The words came out strangled. Who was that little girl? Sophia's hand stilled on the car door. For a heartbeat, her armor cracked, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. Then the mask slammed back into place. Ancient history. Nothing that concerns you. Everything about you concerns me. Marcus stepped closer, close enough to see the faint scar above her left eyebrow that hadn't been there 7 years ago. Tell me the truth. For once in your life, just tell me the truth. The truth. Sophia laughed, but there was no humor in it. The truth is that some people don't deserve redemption, Marcus. The truth is that some choices can't be undone. She opened the car door. The Riverside Diner on 5th Street? 1 hour. Come alone and come prepared to make a choice you can live with. She drove away without looking back, leaving Marcus standing in a puddle of rainwater and regret. The USB drive in his pocket felt heavier than ever, loaded with enough evidence to destroy his father's empire and everyone who'd ever worked for it, including the night janitor who had 3 kids and a mortgage, including his father's secretary who was 6 months from retirement, including himself. The Riverside Diner was the kind of place that existed in every small town in America. All cracked vinyl and faded dreams, where coffee was strong enough to wake the dead, and the waitresses had seen everything twice. Marcus found Sophia in a corner booth, already nursing what looked like her 3rd cup. She'd changed clothes again. Now she wore jeans and a leather jacket, looking more like the woman he'd fallen in love with in college. But her eyes were different. Harder, carved by experiences he couldn't imagine. You came, she said, without looking up from her coffee. Did I have a choice? Everyone has choices. That's what makes us human. She gestured to the seat across from her. The question is whether we're brave enough to make the right ones. Slid into the booth, hyper-aware of every detail. The way her fingers trembled almost imperceptibly around her mug. The dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. The wedding ring she'd worn 7 years ago was gone, but there was still a pale band of skin where it used to be. Start talking, he said. Sophia finally looked at him, and the pain in her eyes nearly broke his heart. 2 years after you left for Kane Industries, my sister was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Stage 4, terminal. Her voice was steady, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the mug. The doctors recommended an experimental treatment. Something new from a pharmaceutical company with an excellent reputation. Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. Kane Industries. The trials were promising. 90% success rate in early studies. My sister was young, healthy otherwise, the perfect candidate. Sophia's smile was bitter as poison. She lasted 3 months. The diner suddenly felt too small, too hot. Marcus wanted to run, to escape the terrible weight of what she was telling him, but her eyes held him pinned like a butterfly on display. The cancer was aggressive, they said. Unusually so. But that happens sometimes. Reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder, sliding it across the table. Except it didn't just happen to my sister. Marcus opened the folder with hands that felt disconnected from his body. Inside were medical records, death certificates, a dozen different names but the same story told over and over. Patients who'd enrolled in Kane Industries' pancreatic cancer trials. Patients who'd died not from the cancer, but from complications that shouldn't have existed. May died on a Tuesday, Sophia continued, her voice soft as a funeral prayer. Was holding her hand when she went. She was 26 years old, Marcus. 26, with a daughter who was barely 3. The folder contained one more photograph. A little girl with Sophia's eyes and an uncertain smile, standing beside a hospital bed. Lily, my niece. Your goddaughter, if you remember. Photograph from the motel room. Not his child, but close enough to matter. Close enough to explain the rage in Sophia's eyes, the careful planning behind her return. I started digging after the funeral, she said. Following paper trails, bribing lab technicians. Sleeping with researchers who had access to files they shouldn't have shared. Do you know what I found? Marcus stared at the death certificates, at names that had become numbers in quarterly reports. At faces that had never appeared in any board meeting he'd attended. The trials were falsified from the beginning. Your father knew the treatment was killing people, and he buried the evidence. Paid off investigators, threatened whistleblowers, destroyed documents. Sophia leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. He killed my sister to protect his profit margins. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Marcus wanted to deny it, to defend the man who'd raised him, who'd taught him about honor and responsibility in doing the right thing. But the evidence was spread across the table between them, undeniable as gravity. How long have you known I was involved? Been tracking Kane Industries for 5 years, following money trails, building cases, waiting for the right moment to strike. Her eyes were black with fury. I've known about your promotion to the board for 2 years. I've read every email you've sent, every report you've filed. I know. You've been asking questions about the trial data for months? Marcus felt the walls closing in. Never knew people were dying. I swear to you, I never knew. But you suspected. Wasn't a question. It's those late nights at the office going through old files. Those meetings with researchers you thought no one knew about? You've been building your own case, haven't you? The USB drive felt like it was burning through his jacket. I found discrepancies, irregularities in the data. I was trying to understand what they meant. And now you know. Sophia gathered the photographs, tucking them away with the careful precision of someone who'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. The question is what you're going to do about it. The waitress approached their table, coffee pot in hand. But something in their expression sent her scurrying away. Around them, the diner hummed with ordinary life. People eating breakfast, reading newspapers, talking about weather and weekend plans. None of them knowing that 2 people in the corner booth were deciding the fate of a billion-dollar empire. I help you, Marcus said slowly. If I testify against my own father, what happens to everyone else? The employees who had nothing to do with this? Some prices are worth paying. Easy to say when it's not your price to pay. Sophia's mask slipped again, revealing grief so raw it took his breath away. You think this is easy for me? You think I wanted to become this person? She gestured to herself. It's the cold calculation. In her eyes, I was a kindergarten teacher. Marcus. I spent my days reading stories and tying shoelaces. I wanted to get married and have babies and live in a house with a white picket fence. What happened to that woman? She died in a hospital room on a Tuesday afternoon, holding her sister's hand. Sophia stood up, throwing money on the table. That woman believed in justice and mercy and second chances. This woman believes in results. She was almost to the door when Marcus called out, desperate to keep her from walking away again. About us? What about what we had? Sophia stopped, her hand on the door handle. When she turned back, her eyes were wet with unshed tears. What we had was beautiful and perfect and completely irrelevant to the choices we have to make now. Wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture so familiar it made his chest ache. Meet me at the Kane Industries headquarters tonight. 11 p.m. Underground parking garage, level B3. She pulled on her sunglasses, hiding behind them like armor. Bring the USB drive, Marcus. It's time to decide who you really are. Ah! The bell above the door chimed as she left, a small sound that seemed to echo forever in the sudden silence. Marcus sat alone in the booth, surrounded by the ghosts of people he'd never known he'd helped kill, carrying the weight of a choice that would define the rest of his life. Outside, storm clouds were gathering again. The Kane Industries tower pierced the Seattle skyline like a steel and glass monument to ambition. Its 47 floors housing enough corporate secrets to topple governments. Marcus had spent the day walking the city streets, trying to reconcile the building he'd called home for 5 years with the tomb of evidence it had apparently become. Every window seemed to hide another lie. Every floor, another layer of carefully constructed deception. At 10:30 p.m., he descended into the underground parking garage, the USB drive burning in his pocket like a loaded weapon. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows between concrete pillars that stretched into darkness. His footsteps echoed off bare walls, each sound a countdown to a moment he couldn't take back. Sophia was waiting by her Mercedes, but she wasn't alone. A man emerged from the shadows behind her, tall and lean, with the kind of face that disappeared in crowds. He wore an expensive suit that didn't quite hide the bulge of a shoulder holster. Marcus Kane, the man said, extending a hand. David Rivers, FBI. I've been looking forward to meeting you. The world tilted sideways. Marcus looked from Rivers to Sophia, seeing her clearly for the first time. The expensive clothes, the careful planning, the way she'd known exactly where to find him. The resources required to track his movements, to orchestrate their meeting at the motel. No federal, I'm justice, Sophia replied, but there was no satisfaction in her voice. Agent Chen, Organized Crime Task Force. I've been undercover for 3 years, building a case against pharmaceutical companies that falsify drug trials. The betrayal hit him like a physical blow. Everything you told me, your sister, the hospital, all of it, all true. Her voice was steady, but he could see the cost of this moment in her eyes. May died exactly the way I described. The only lie was letting you think I was doing this for revenge. She pulled out her badge, the leather worn from years of use. Agent Rivers stepped closer, his expression sympathetic but implacable. Mr. Kane, we know about the USB drive. We know you've been conducting your own investigation into the pancreatic cancer trials. Also know you've uncovered evidence that could save lives and prevent this from happening again. Marcus backed away from both of them, his mind reeling. This whole thing was a setup. The motel, the diner, all of it choreographed to get me here. Not choreographed, Sophia said quietly. I didn't know you'd be at that motel. I was there working another case, tracking one of your father's associates. When you walked into that room, I thought I was seeing a ghost, but you used it. Used what we had, what I felt for you. Yes. The admission came out raw, honest, because 37 people are dead, Marcus. 37 people whose families deserve answers, because your father is planning to take this treatment to market next month, and hundreds more will die unless someone stops him. Rivers pulled out a tablet, showing Marcus's surveillance footage of Kane Industries executives meeting in shadowy restaurants, transferring briefcases, shaking hands with men whose faces the camera couldn't quite catch. Your father has connections we're still mapping, Rivers explained. International pharmaceutical cartels, offshore accounts, politicians whose campaigns mysteriously receive large donations right before crucial votes. He swiped to the next image. But you're the key, Mr. Kane. You're the only person with legitimate access to the files we need, the only one who can testify about what happens in those board meetings. Marcus stared at the screen, recognizing faces from company picnics and Christmas parties. People he'd known for years, people who'd watched him grow up, all part of a machine that ground human lives into profit margins. What happens to him? To my father, that depends on how much he cooperates, Rivers said. But based on what we already know, he's looking at multiple life sentences. Conspiracy, murder, racketeering, international fraud, odd. Unless someone with insider knowledge helps us understand the full scope of the operation, the implication was clear. Help us, and maybe we can make a deal. Stay silent and watch your father burn anyway. Sophia moved closer, her hand reaching out as if to touch his arm, then stopping. I know how this feels. I know what it's like to discover that everything you believed about someone was a lie. Do you? Marcus's voice was bitter. Because right now I'm looking at a woman who spent 3 days manipulating me into betraying my own family, a woman who used my feelings for her as a weapon. You're right. The acknowledgement seemed to cost her something. I did use what was between us. I told myself it was for the greater good, that the ends justified the means. She removed her sunglasses, letting him see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of 3 years spent living a lie. But the truth is, when I saw you in that room, all I could think about was how much I'd missed you, how much I'd missed the man you used to be before all of this. And what man is that? The one who once told me he wanted to spend his life making the world better? The one who dreamed about using his family's resources to fund medical research that would save lives instead of ending them? Her voice softened. The man who would never stand by and watch innocent people die, no matter what it cost him. Around them, the parking garage seemed to pulse with secrets. Cars that belonged to executives who'd signed off on murder. Security cameras that had recorded conversations no jury would ever hear. The building above them hummed with the machinery of an empire built on bones. Rivers checked his watch. "We need a decision, Mr. Kane. Our sources tell us your father is planning to destroy the remaining trial records tonight. Once those files are gone, our case becomes much more difficult to prove." Marcus felt the USB drive in his pocket, its weight both insignificant and crushing. "If I give this to you, if I testify, what guarantee do I have that you'll protect the innocent employees, the people who had no idea what was really happening?" "You have my word," Rivers said. "We're not interested in destroying lives unnecessarily. We want the people responsible, not the entire company." "And me? What happens to me?" Sophia and Rivers exchanged a look that told Marcus more than he wanted to know. "That depends on what's on that drive," Rivers said carefully. "If you were actively involved in covering up deaths and falsifying data, then you'll face charges. But if you were gathering evidence to expose the truth, if you were preparing to become a whistleblower, then you're a witness, not a defendant." The distinction was crucial, but Marcus wasn't sure which side of the line he fell on. He'd known something was wrong, but he'd also signed reports, attended meetings, participated in a system that had killed dozens of people. "I need time to think." "We don't have time," Sophia said urgently. "Marcus, there's something else. Something I haven't told you." Pulled out her phone, showing him a text message time-stamped 20 minutes earlier. "Your father knows you have evidence. He knows you've been investigating him." The message was brief but terrifying. "Clean up the loose ends. All of them. He's not just planning to destroy records," Rivers added grimly. "He's planning to eliminate anyone who could testify against him, including you." As if summoned by their words, the sound of footsteps echoed through the garage. Multiple sets, moving with military precision. Marcus looked around wildly, suddenly. Aware of how exposed they were, how perfectly trapped between concrete walls and shadows that could hide an army. "This way," Sophia whispered, grabbing his arm and pulling him toward a service elevator. But it was too late. Figures emerged from behind cars and pillars, surrounding them with the efficiency of a pack of wolves. The man leading them was someone Marcus recognized. Thomas Carver, his father's head of security. A former military contractor with eyes like winter and a reputation for solving problems permanently. "Mr. Kane," Carver said, his voice eerily calm. "Your father would like to speak with you." Rivers reached for his weapon but stopped when red laser dots appeared on his chest. Professional snipers, positioned throughout the garage. They were outnumbered and outgunned. "We've been monitoring your investigation for quite some time." The trap had been perfect. Not sprung on Marcus, but on the federal agents trying to bring down his father's empire. Somehow, Kane Industries had known about this sting operation. Somehow they'd been one step ahead. Sophia's hand found Marcus's in the darkness, squeezing once before being pulled away by armed men. As they were separated, she mouthed words he couldn't quite make out, but her eyes spoke clearly enough. "Trust no one. Survive. Find another way."
The elevator.
The elevator doors opened with a cheerful ding, revealing Marcus's father. Alexander Kane stood. In the fluorescent light like a monument to power, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the late hour. His smile was warm and paternal, the same expression he'd worn when teaching Marcus to ride a bike or helping with homework. "Hello, son," he said as if this were a normal family reunion. "We need to talk." The executive elevator climbed 47 floors in silence broken only by the mechanical whisper of cables and the thundering of Marcus's heart. Alexander Kane stood beside him with the casual confidence of a man who owned the world and everyone in it, occasionally glancing at his gold watch, as if this were just another appointment in his busy schedule. The penthouse office was a monument to power. All dark wood and leather that reeked of money and influence. Rain streaked the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the city lights below into abstract smears of color. Alexander poured himself a scotch from a crystal decanter that probably cost more than most people's cars. "Drink?" he offered, as if they were old friends catching up, instead of father and son standing on opposite sides of a war. "I'll pass." Alexander shrugged, settling into his chair behind a desk the size of a small aircraft carrier. Suit yourself, though I imagine you could use something to steady your nerves right about now. Marcus remained standing, every muscle coiled for a fight he knew he couldn't win. Carver and 2 other security guards flanked the door, their hands resting casually on concealed weapons. 37 people, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the civilized veneer like a blade. 37 people died because of your lies. 37 people died because they had cancer, Alexander replied calmly. A disease that kills nearly 600,000 Americans every year. Our treatment gave them hope. The fact that it didn't work doesn't make us murderers. The fact that you knew it didn't work and hid the evidence does. Alexander's smile was patient, indulgent, the way it had been when Marcus was 7, and asked why some people were poor while others lived in mansions. Marcus, you're thinking like a child. The world isn't divided into good people and bad people. It's divided into people who understand how power works and people who get crushed by those who do. He gestured to the window, to the city sprawling below them. Every light you see down there represents someone whose life has been improved by Kane Industries. Jobs, medical breakthroughs, innovations that have saved millions of lives. Really prepared to destroy all of that for 37 people who were going to die anyway? The casualness of it, the way he reduced human lives to numbers on a balance sheet, made Marcus's stomach turn. They trusted us. They believed we could save them, and we tried. Sometimes medical research fails. Sometimes people die. That's the price of progress. Alexander stood up, moving to the window. But you already know this, don't you? You've known for months that some of our trials had ... irregularities. You've known, and you've stayed silent. You've cashed your paychecks, attended board meetings, signed documents. You're as complicit as anyone. The accusation hit home because it was partially true. Marcus had suspected, had even found evidence, but he'd hesitated to act. He'd told himself he needed more proof, more certainty, when really he'd been terrified of what he might discover. The USB drive, Alexander continued, turning back to face him. I assume you have it with you. The one containing copies of our internal communications, trial data, correspondence with regulatory agencies. His smile turned predatory. Did you really think we weren't monitoring your activities? Every file you accessed, every email you sent, every website you visited, we've known about your little investigation from the beginning. The betrayal was complete. Marcus had thought he was being careful, thought he was protecting himself while gathering evidence. Instead, he'd been dancing to his father's tune the entire time. Then why didn't you stop me? Because you're my son. Alexander's voice softened, becoming almost gentle. Because I hoped you would come to your senses before doing something we'd both regret. Because I believed that blood still meant something to you. Movement in the outer office caught Marcus's attention. Through the glass partition, he could see Carver's men escorting someone down the hallway. Someone with dark hair and expensive clothes who moved like a federal agent even with her hands zip-tied behind her back. Sophia, where's Agent Rivers? Marcus asked, his voice tight with fear. Agent Rivers suffered an unfortunate accident during his arrest, resisting federal officers. Is dangerous work. Alexander's tone remained conversational, but the threat was unmistakable. Agent Chen, however, is quite safe. For now. They brought her into the office, forcing her into a chair facing Alexander's desk. Her lip was split and there was a bruise, forming on her left cheek, but her eyes still burned with defiant fury. When she looked at Marcus, he saw something that stopped his heart. Disappointment. She thought he'd betrayed them, thought he'd led them into this trap. The beautiful Agent Chen, Alexander said, studying her like a specimen in a laboratory. 3 years undercover, building a case against pharmaceutical fraud. Quite impressive, really. Your cover was nearly perfect. Nearly you made one mistake. You let emotion cloud your judgment. Alexander gestured toward Marcus. The moment you saw my son in that motel room, you deviated from your mission. You made it personal instead of professional. Sophia's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. I know about your sister, Alexander continued. Tragic loss. Cancer is a terrible disease. But her death wasn't our fault any more than a car crash is. The fault of the automotive industry. Medical research involves risk. Sometimes that risk doesn't pay off. You falsified the trial data, Sophia said, her voice raw with controlled rage. You knew the treatment was making patients worse, not better. You knew it was killing them faster than the cancer would have. I knew the treatment wasn't working as well as we'd hoped. I knew that publicizing preliminary negative results would destroy years of research and billions of dollars in development costs. I knew that sometimes difficult decisions have to be made for the greater good. Alexander moved to his desk, opening a drawer and removing a thick manila folder. This contains financial records showing Agent Chen receiving payments from various offshore accounts over the past 18 months. Payments that coincide remarkably well with her investigation into our company. Alexander smiled as he spread the documents across his desk. It appears Agent Chen has been taking money from the very criminals she's supposed to be investigating. The papers looked authentic, complete with bank statements and wire transfer records. Marcus knew they were fabricated, but they were perfect fabrications, the kind that would destroy a federal agent's career and credibility. You son of a bitch, Sophia whispered, staring at the forged evidence of her supposed corruption. Language, Agent Chen. We're all professionals here. Alexander gathered the papers with theatrical care. These documents will be delivered to the FBI director tomorrow morning, along with a detailed report about a rogue agent who was compromised by foreign interests. Your investigation dies with your career. Marcus felt something break inside him, a dam that had been holding back years of doubt and fear and carefully buried rage. Let her go. I'm afraid that's not possible. Agent Chen knows too much about our operations to simply walk away, though I'm prepared to be merciful if certain conditions are met. The office fell silent except for the whisper of rain against glass. Marcus could feel the weight of the moment, the terrible mathematics of power and sacrifice playing out in real time. His father held all the cards, controlled every variable, had planned for every contingency except one. He hadn't planned for Marcus to stop caring about his own survival. What conditions? Alexander's smile was triumphant. The USB drive, obviously. All copies of any documents you may have made. Your signature on a statement declaring that you conducted your own investigation and found no evidence of wrongdoing by Kane Industries. He paused, letting the implication sink in. And your public testimony that Agent Chen attempted to bribe you for false evidence against your own company? Us. The betrayal would be complete. Not only would Marcus destroy any chance of bringing his father to justice, but he would personally destroy the woman who'd risked everything to stop a killer from walking free. And if I refuse, then Agent Chen's body will be found in her apartment tomorrow morning. Apparent suicide brought on by the shame of her corruption being exposed. You'll be found beside her, having killed yourself out of guilt for not reporting her criminal activity sooner. Alexander's voice remained pleasant, conversational, tragic, really. But these things happen when good people get involved with bad elements. Sophia was shaking her head frantically, trying to communicate something. With her eyes, "Don't do it," she mouthed. "Don't let him win." But Marcus wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at his father, seeing him clearly for the first time in his life. Not the man who'd taught him to throw a baseball or helped with college applications, but a monster who would murder his own son to protect his empire. There is a third option, Alexander continued. You come back to work. Forget this unfortunate episode. Help me expand Kane Industries into international markets. Together, we can save millions of lives and make billions of dollars. Isn't that better than dying for 37 people who are already gone? The offer hung in the air like poison. It's partnership and atrocity. A chance to live, to prosper, to build something lasting. All paid for with the blood of innocence and the silence of the complicit. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket, feeling the USB drive one last time. Then he pulled out something else. Entirely. A small digital recorder that had been running since the moment he'd entered the building. You're right about one thing, Marcus said quietly. I've been recording conversations for months. Building evidence, trying to understand the truth. He held up the device, its red light blinking steadily. This recording will be uploaded to every major news outlet, every federal agency. and every regulatory body in 6 different countries if I don't enter a specific code into my phone within the next hour. Alexander's composure cracked for the first time, his face twisting with rage. You arrogant little fool. Do you have any idea what you've done? I've ended this, Marcus replied. I've ended you. Carver moved toward him, but Alexander held. Up a hand, wait. His eyes were calculating, searching for an angle, a way to turn this development to his advantage. Marcus, think about what you're doing. The recording implicates you as much as me. You'll go to prison too. I know. You'll lose everything. Your freedom, your future, any chance at a normal life. I know. Alexander's mask slipped completely, revealing the cold fury underneath. Then you're a fool. Oh, just like your mother was. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His mother had died when he was 12, supposedly from a heart attack, brought on by a rare genetic condition. But now, looking into his father's eyes, Marcus wondered if there had been more to the story. What did you do to her? It's nothing that wasn't necessary, Alexander said, his voice flat and emotionless. She found out about some of our early research projects, came inconveniently moral about the whole thing, started asking questions, making threats. He shrugged. She gave me the same ultimatum you're giving me now. Stop the research or she'd go public. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Marcus felt like he was falling through space, through time, through every assumption he'd ever made about his life. You killed her. I protected our family's legacy. I protected you from having to grow up poor and powerless while criminals destroyed everything we'd built. Alexander's voice turned pleading. Everything I've done has been for you, Marcus, for our family, for our future. But Marcus was no longer listening. He was thinking about his mother's funeral, about the way his father had consoled him, had promised to always protect him from the cruel world, about the foundation that bore her name, supposedly dedicated to advancing medical research, all of it built on her grave. The digital recorder seemed to burn in his hand as he looked at Sophia. Seeing the desperate hope in her eyes, she believed he would do the right thing, would sacrifice everything to stop the machine that had killed her sister, dozens of others. The question was whether he was brave enough to prove her right. Outside, thunder rolled across the city like the sound of gods at war. The silence stretched between father and son like a chasm carved by 20 years of lies. Marcus stood in the center of his father's empire, holding a device that could bring it all crashing down.
Ow.
While rain continued its relentless assault on the Window's 47 floors above the sleeping city, Alexander Kane recovered his composure with the practiced ease of a man who'd spent decades manipulating people and situations to his will. You're bluffing, he said, but uncertainty flickered. In his eyes, you wouldn't destroy yourself just to hurt me, wouldn't I? Marcus's voice was steady, despite the chaos in his chest. You taught me that some things are worth sacrificing everything for. You just never imagined I'd apply that lesson to you. Carver tensed, his hand moving toward his weapon, but Alexander shook his head. No. If he dies, the recording goes public automatically. We need to find another solution. The admission that his father was genuinely trapped, genuinely afraid, sent a strange calm through Marcus. For the first time in his life, he held real power over the man, who'd controlled every aspect of his existence. Sophia was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not hope exactly, but something deeper. Recognition, maybe. The moment when someone discovers who they really are under pressure. There is no other solution, Marcus said. Agent Rivers is dead because he couldn't let the truth come out. Many others, Dad? How many people have died to keep your secret safe? Fewer then would have died if Kane Industries had been destroyed, Alexander replied, his voice taking on the cadence of a man who'd rehearsed this justification countless times. Do you know how many life-saving drugs we've brought to market? How many people are alive today because of research funded by this company? And how many died because you buried the research that didn't fit your narrative? The question hung in the air like an indictment. Through the glass partition, Marcus could see security guards stationed throughout the outer office, automatic weapons casually displayed. Even if he managed to get the recording out, even if he exposed his father's crimes, There was no guarantee either he or Sophia would survive the night. "Let me make you a different offer," Alexander said, moving to his desk and opening another drawer. Inside was a gun, sleek and black and somehow inevitable. Agent Chen dies. Tonight, officially, she was killed while resisting arrest during a failed sting operation. You return to work. We destroy all evidence of this unpleasant episode and life goes on. And if I refuse, then you both die. The recording never sees daylight, and I spend the rest of my life regretting that my son chose to die a fool rather than live as a king. Alexander picked up the weapon with casual familiarity, checking the clip with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Marcus wondered how many other people had stood in this office, facing the same choice. How many had chosen pragmatism over principle? How many had simply disappeared? The mathematics are simple, Marcus. 2 deaths tonight, or thousands of deaths when Kane Industries collapses and takes its research programs with it. Which choice serves the greater good? But Marcus wasn't thinking about mathematics anymore. He was thinking about his mother, about the way she'd held him when he had nightmares. It's about the stories she'd told him about knights and heroes who sacrificed everything to protect the innocent. He was thinking about Sophia's sister, dying in a hospital bed while clutching hope in the form of a treatment that was slowly killing her. He was thinking about 37 faces he'd never seen, 37 lives reduced to statistics in quarterly reports. "You know what the funny thing is?" Marcus said, his voice surprisingly calm. "I actually believed you when I was growing up. I believed you were a good man trying to make the world better. Believed that success and morality could coexist. That power could be used responsibly. They can be. No, you're not. You're a killer who's convinced himself that murder is mathematics. You're a coward who hides behind the greater good while destroying anyone who threatens your control." Alexander's face darkened with rage. "You sanctimonious little bastard. You think you're noble? You think you're heroic? You're nothing but a privileged child who's never had to make hard choices." "You're right," Marcus said quietly. "I've never had to make hard choices. Until now." He looked at Sophia, seeing the woman who'd once promised to love him forever, who'd disappeared without explanation, who'd returned as a federal agent seeking justice for her sister's death. Her eyes held no anger now, no disappointment. Only a quiet acceptance of whatever choice he was about to make. "I'm sorry," he said to her, "for all of it. For not knowing sooner, for not acting faster, for not being the man you needed me to be 7 years ago." "Marcus," she said softly, "don't do anything stupid." But he was already moving, already committing to a choice that would define not just his own fate, but the fate of everyone who'd ever trusted Kane Industries with their lives. Instead of activating the recording upload, instead of calling for help or trying to negotiate or making any of the rational choices a reasonable person might make, Marcus Kane did something that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. He grabbed his father's gun. The struggle was brief and brutal. Alexander was older but stronger, with the desperate fury of a man watching his empire crumble. They fought across the office, crashing into furniture, slamming against windows. Both men fighting for control of a weapon that represented the difference between life and death, between justice and corruption. Between truth and the comfortable lies that had built a fortune. The gun went off. Marcus found himself on the floor, his ears ringing, his vision blurred. Above him, his father stood swaying, blood spreading across the front of his white shirt, like spilled ink. Alexander looked down at the wound with something like surprise, then at Marcus with an expression that might have been pride. "You actually did it," he whispered. "You actually chose them over family." Alexander Kane, pharmaceutical kingpin, killer, father, collapsed behind his desk worth more than most people's houses, his blood seeping into carpet that would never be clean again. Carver and the security guards rushed in, weapons drawn, but stopped when they saw the recording device still blinking in Marcus's hand. The mathematics had shifted. Their boss was dead or dying, and the evidence that could destroy them all was about to go public regardless of what happened next. "Stand down," Marcus said, his voice carrying an authority he'd never possessed before. "It's over." Cutting her restraints on a piece of broken glass, moving toward Alexander's prone form with the clinical efficiency of someone trained in emergency medicine. "He's still alive," she said, checking his pulse. "Barely." "Call an ambulance," Marcus ordered. "Call the FBI, call everyone." But even as he spoke, he knew it was too late for his father. Alexander Kane died as he'd lived, surrounded by the trappings of power, but ultimately alone with his choices. Last words were barely audible, meant for Marcus alone. "Your mother would be proud." The next 6 hours passed in a blur of federal agents, crime scene technicians, emergency medical personnel, and reporters who'd somehow learned about the story. Despite the late hour, Marcus gave his statement sitting in a police car, watching his father's body being wheeled out of the building on a stretcher, covered by a white sheet that made him look smaller than he'd ever seemed in life. The USB drive and the digital recording provided enough evidence to launch a federal investigation that would ultimately bring down not just Kane Industries, but a network of pharmaceutical companies, regulatory officials, and politicians that stretched across 3 continents. Hundreds of executives would face charges. Thousands of families would receive justice for loved ones who died trusting in treatments that were designed to fail. But justice came at a price that Marcus would spend the rest of his life paying. Dawn broke gray and cold over Seattle, painting the world in shades of ash and regret. Marcus stood on the courthouse steps 3 months later, having just pled guilty to conspiracy and accessory charges that would send him to federal prison for the next 8 years. The media had branded him everything from hero to traitor, sometimes. In the same article, Sophia approached him as he descended the marble steps, her FBI badge replaced by a simple black suit that made her look like any other lawyer or bureaucrat in the city. She'd been promoted following the successful conclusion of the Kane Industries investigation. But Marcus could see the cost of victory in the lines around her eyes. 8 years, she said. It wasn't a question. I'll serve 6 with good behavior. Maybe 5. And then Marcus looked out at the city his father had once controlled, now free from the shadow of Kane Industries. "I haven't thought that far ahead." They walked together toward the street where a federal transport waited to take him to begin his sentence. The morning crowds flowed around them like water around stones, everyone hurrying toward their own destinations, their own crises, their own choices between right and wrong. "Do you regret it?" Sophia asked. "Destroying everything?" Marcus considered. The question, as they reached the transport vehicle, "I regret that it took me so long to do it. I regret that 37 people died while I was learning to be brave." He paused, looking back at the courthouse where justice had finally, imperfectly been served. "But no, I don't regret stopping him." The federal marshal opened the transport door, but Marcus didn't move toward it immediately. Instead, he turned to face the woman who'd loved him, left him, returned to destroy him, and ultimately saved him from becoming his father. "What about us?" he asked. "What happens to us?" Sophia's smile was sad and beautiful and final. "There is no us, Marcus. There's just 2 people who did the right thing when it mattered most, even though it cost us everything we wanted." She kissed his cheek gently, a benediction and a goodbye, then walked away without looking back. Marcus watched her disappear into the morning crowd, carrying with her the ghost of who they might have been if the world were different. If choices were simpler, if love were enough to overcome the weight of the past. The federal marshal cleared his throat impatiently. "Time to go, Mr. Kane." Marcus nodded and climbed into the transport, leaving behind the ruins of an empire built on lies and the body of a father who'd taught him everything except how to be good. As Seattle fell away behind bulletproof glass, he thought about a future that waited beyond his prison sentence. A world where pharmaceutical companies would face real oversight, where patients would know they could trust their treatments, where the dead could finally rest in peace knowing their deaths had meant something. It wasn't the future he'd planned, but it was a future he could live with. The transport carried him toward federal prison, toward 8 years of paying for his father's crimes and his own silence, toward a reckoning with choices that couldn't be undone. But for the first time since walking into that motel room, Marcus Kane felt something he'd almost forgotten existed. Peace. The end asterisk. Engagement Hook's comment below. What would you do if you discovered your family's fortune was built on innocent people's deaths? Subscribe for parts 2 to 5. and hit the bell for notifications. Okay. Like if you're ready for an emotional roller coaster, share with someone who loves plot twists asterisk.